Hi all, welcome to my channel. I'm Will Wyvern. Today I want to talk about the differences between graveyard and cemetery and using dirt and energy from the graveyard or cemetery. As always, these are my thoughts, my beliefs, my opinions. This is what works for me. I share with you so you can find something to work in your practice. Now, the first thing we need to distinguish, what is a graveyard, what is a cemetery? The technical term, a cemetery is a non-denominational burial ground. It is a standalone burial site. It's not affiliated with a church or a specific religion. It's where anybody can be buried, any religion, atheist, whatever beliefs, you can be buried together. A graveyard is a site that's associated with a certain religion, associated with a church. And these are usually members of that church. It's not a public, open for anybody type of burial site. So those are the two major differences. Cemetery, open for anybody, whatever religion. Graveyard, one religion, tied to a church, kind of private. The other thing, let's talk about using actual physical soil or dirt from the burial site versus using energy from the site. Now, I know some spells are very specific. They call for graveyard dirt or cemetery dirt. Most 9 out of 10 times they ask for graveyard versus cemetery, but sometimes cemetery works just as well. Taking dirt from a graveyard is something you have to be very careful about. You are taking dirt from a sacred, consecrated ground. And the number one rule is you have to ask permission. You have to ask, is it okay if I remove the soil for spell working? Always ask permission and what you're going to use the soil for. Don't just say, hey, can I have some dirt? You need to ask if you can take it and what you want to use it for. Now, who are you going to ask? Your deity, your god, your goddess, your ancestors, the earth, the soil, the spirits, whatever you believe in, whatever you place your belief systems in. It may be, the universe. So you're going to ask the earth, the soil itself, can I take some of you for spell working? You're going to ask your god or your goddess. You're going to ask the spirits who are living there or who are dead there, that resident, that are in that spot. You're going to ask them for permission. Then you're going to tell them what you want to use it for. You're going to cast a spell. You're going to use it for protection. You're going to use it for divination. Whatever you're going to use it for. Then you're going to wait for an answer. That answer can come across as a kind of calm, quiet stillness, and usually that means it's okay. Or you may feel physically ill, or you may feel in danger, and that means no. So kind of wait a minute after you ask and just see what, you're told, what the answer is. If you get a positive answer, then go ahead and take some soil or some dirt. Don't take a bucket full. Just take as much as you need for the spell. And usually it's not that much. Just a spoonful, or just a tiny little bit. That's all you really need. Now, some of the things that you can use this graveyard dirt for, like I said, protection. If you want to do some divination, if you want to do ancestor work, if you want to commune with your ancestors, or you want to give thanks to your ancestors, using that graveyard dirt can help. Now, after you take the graveyard dirt, it's important that you say thank you and sometimes leave an offering. Leave a memento of your thanks. It could be a small coin, like a penny or a nickel or a dime. Just place it in the soil, just to symbolize your thanks. It could be, a little bit of honey or a little bit of beer poured into the ground, some wine. It could be a cracker or some pieces of bread, put that in the ground, some sugar, you just sprinkle it in the ground, something sweet, something to say thank you, something to replace what you took. You're taking that soil, you're going to put something back. It's very important that you do that. Ask permission, tell, what you're going to use it for, give thanks, give a little bit of offering, and that's the right way to take it if you feel compelled to actually take graveyard dirt. Now, if you don't want to take graveyard dirt, if you think it's an act of desecration to take soil from a burial site, what you could do is just take the energy from that site. You don't have to take soil, you don't have to take dirt, you can just take the energy. And the type of energy that's going to be there, it's the energy not of the people who are buried there, but it's the energy of the people who visit there. It's the energy of the people who go to that gravesite, who go to that cemetery. It could be sorrow because they miss the person. It could be joy because they're remembering all the good times and they enjoy, being in the presence of their loved one again. Even though their loved one is passed, they're still in that presence and they feel joy. They feel comfort. So you're going to get a wide range of energies in a graveyard or a cemetery. Now, graveyard versus a cemetery, with a cemetery, you're going to have a whole lot more people. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to just go to visit or who like to be in cemeteries, who go for walks, who like to just, sightsee. You're going to have a lot more people. It's not going to be as intimate. They're not, some of these people visit cemeteries not because their loved ones are there, but just because they like the peace and the quiet and the solitude. They want to pay respects to those who have passed. It may be a military holiday, or a fireman or a policeman may have just passed and they want to pay their respects. So it's going to be a different kind of energy to cemetery versus a graveyard. And at a graveyard, you're going to have a lot more intimacy because sometimes you have generations of families. You may have 3, 4, 5 generations of families there. And that's one gravesite that I always go to. I do not know if this is a graveyard or a cemetery. Some of these graves are marked back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. I think it was a communal gravesite. It wasn't attached to a church, but it may have been some farmers in that area who agreed on a section of land for burying their loved ones. So I consider it more of a cemetery than a graveyard, because there are 4 or 5 generations of people buried there from the late 1700s to the early 1900s. This is a site I like to go to. I don't take soil, but I just like to be in the presence of that energy, those emotions, and it's just a peaceful place. I don't take anything, but I have taken energy. And you can take that with a crystal, with a necklace. If you have a necklace with a crystal on it, you can use silver. You can take a small vial of water, anything that is going to hold that energy. And you're going to do the same thing if you take dirt. You're going to ask for permission to take that energy. You're going to say what you want to use that energy for. You want to use it for spell casting. You want to use it to charge an item of protection. You want to, just whatever you're using that energy for, and then pull that energy into the crystal or into the necklace or silver or water. And then again, you're going to thank whoever it is you asked, thank them for that gift of the energy, and then give a small offering. A penny, a nickel, some wine, honey, some sugar, some candy, a cracker, something sweet. Always replace that space with you take something, you need to put something in that space. Those are the main differences between graveyard cemetery and using the actual dirt and the energy. I know there are a lot of spells that ask for specific graveyard dirt, but if you're not comfortable using that, I don't see a problem with using graveyard energy. Ask for permission, what you're going to use it for, give thanks or an offering, and then once you're done with it, once you're actually finished with that soil or that dirt, or once you've used that energy, return it. Go back to where you got it from. And then sprinkle it back where, if you took soil, if you took some dirt, sprinkle it back. If you took that energy, just take that energy, empty it out of the vessel that you put it in, and put it back into the graveyard or the cemetery. Something else you need to think about when you're taking this soil or when you're taking this energy, it may depend on where you take it from. if you take it from the outside or the edge of the graveyard and cemetery, because that's marking a boundary between the living and the dead. And sometimes that could be a very powerful item to use in your spell casting. Sometimes you want to take it from a specific grave. If you have an ancestor and you want to take that dirt from their grave because you want to do ancestor work and make your ancestors commune with your ancestors, then you want to take it from a relative if you can, or someone who is close to you, or a friend, or, someone who meant something to you. Sometimes, and I hesitate to mention this, but I want to cover all bases. If you are planning on doing a jinx or a hex or a curse, sometimes you may want to take that dirt from a bad location. Not necessarily an evil person, you don't want to mess with that, but take it, just walk around the cemetery and you're going to feel places that are dark and places that are light. You're going to feel a heaviness if you're approaching a dark spot, or you're going to feel lightness if you're approaching a light spot. So some of those jinxes, hexes, and curses, you may have to get that soil from a darker or the oldest place in the cemetery or graveyard. That's going to work better for hexes, jinxes, and curses. I don't like to mention that, but I want to cover all bases because people ask questions. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Difference between a graveyard, difference between a cemetery, difference between dirt, physical soil, and just taking the energy. I recommend always use energy first if you can. If you feel the need to use soil, then go ahead and use it, but very sparingly, and be careful. When you take something out of a graveyard into your own private space, you need to be protected, because you think you know what you're taking, but you need to be careful, because sometimes you're opening a pathway and it's not something to try without practice, without guidance, without the proper protection in place and the safeguards in place. So think about it before you do it. I just want to give you some advice and some experience. So if you do decide to do it, you can kind of think about what you're doing and how to do it. As always, ask permission, say what you're going to use it for, and give thanks. Always do those three things and you should be safe. As always, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, let me know. I love hearing from you because I love that feedback. I like to know I'm reaching you, and I love to be, to try and answer your questions and give you more guidance if I can. If you do try to experiment and work with graveyard dirt or energy, I wish you much success. I wish you blessings. I hope your practice grows and it's successful. As always, I love anything to do with my ancestors. I do what I can to work with my ancestors. And just one story I like telling whenever I talk about graveyard dirt, I have a group of friends, and they immigrated from Germany back in the early 1800s. And when they came to America, they got a little tin, a small little, like 5x6 tin box, and they filled it with graveyard soil from the graveyard in their church, which had like 5 or 6 generations of their family buried there, because they knew they were never coming back. But they wanted to bring a bit of their ancestor, their heritage with them. They don't do magic, they don't do spells, they've got it sitting up on their mantle, but it's just a little bit of home. So if you want to do that, because I know we move around and your parents may be buried in another state, or your grandparents might be buried in another state. The next time you visit them, ask your grandparents or your parents, hey, can I take a little bit of you home with me? Can I take some of the soil that you rest in and have it, close to me? Have it, on my hearth at home, or maybe, on my altar or next to my bed, just to get that little bit of peace and comfort to know that your relative or your family member is with you. You don't always have to do magic with graveyard dirt. You can have it as a memento or just something to remember your loved ones by. I wish you well. As always, thank you.